Thanks to the 6th International Scientific Technical Conference Print, Multimedia and Web for giving us the opportunity to present the following research project. Our names are Jessica Ortega Diaz and Armando Romero, and we're going to talk about our project called Reconnection, Visualization of Mexican Mysticism in the Era of Globalization, in which the Dr. Natalia Gurieva and us participated.
This work exposed a multimedia project of photography and musicalization, a performance whose central topic is female figures within the legends and myths that are part of Mexican mysticism, with the goal of adapting and redefining these characters to a contemporary context and point of view, to analyze the possibility of observing the change in the Mexican female identity over the years. The final step of this project will be its divulgation through social media so it can be accessible to anyone. I will talk a little about the context, documentation, keywords, and the legends that are part of this research, as well as the visual development of the female figures, the Momexco Pinky, Las Curanderas, the Siragüen Mermaid, and the Llorona, explaining their main characteristics and the process of the photographs.
And I will talk about the music composed for each female figure, the ideas behind each theme, and the construction of the atmospheres.
And in the end, we will mention our conclusions. For ancient societies, myth and magical thinking constituting a fundamental axis in the identity construction of the community. These histories answer to ethical and social situations where we find the basis of an identity construction of the society. These communicate and express through expression of the individuals such as the various artistic disciplines such as painting, drawing, and dance, but the most direct of them was the literature and oral communication. Paul Sumter explained, "There's no doubt that the ability to narrate is the defining of the anthropological state, that conversely, memory, dream, myth, legend, history, and the rest together constitute the way in which individuals and groups try to locate themselves in the world."
No culture is exempt from having myths and legends that characterize and mark its society to the extent of being able to remain until today in its collective imagination, adapting to a constant change of space and time. Within these stories, it is possible to observe the different perspectives and values that were rooted in the community in different social aspects, being the object of investigation of this project one of them. The vision of the feminine in the different characters and figures in these stories and its current interpretation.
The goal of the following research is to analyze the female characters within these myths and legends of Mexico to recreate them in a multimedia performance project for their diffusion. Mexico is a country rich in myths and legends that continue to survive through the generation due to the oral diffusion and greater documentation that we have about them, as they are an important part of the country's history because many of these myths that are still present in Mexican society have its origins in the worldview of the pre-Columbian cultures of ancient Mexico. In the analysis of Dr. Aurelio González, professor of the Colegio de Mexico, we observed that many of these myths of the traditional Mexican storytelling have had modifications or multiple versions due to the conjunction of the indigenous tradition and the European tradition. We define this project as a performance because, according to Paul Sumter, the performance is an action of artistic expression in which a message is being transmitted and is perceived by the people connected and united by the same geographical space and defined time in which they can be viewed and understood in a certain way to each other, and if they change the performance and the interpretation of it also change.
This performance consists of making a visual interpretation through a photographic series where the selected female figures will be captured and where their most representative characteristics and essence can be observed in a contemporary vision that adapts to the time and place we live, as well as the composition of a musical piece for each of the figures, creating an atmosphere that immerses the viewer in this worldview. This performance is the consequence of the interpretation of these stories according to the time and space where we live. Through this, we can see a different type of identity and resignification of these figures and of the feminine. These new identities, or as Fernando Broncano calls them, imagined identities, are just and only one perspective of the many there are, all different and diverse in this time in Mexico.
The connection between technology and culture today is very clear. Globalization has given way to several interesting cultural phenomena. The identity, traditions, and cultural traits of different countries and regions reach distant places easily in a way that it was never thought that they could reach. These new aspects and interesting concepts capture the general population curiosity and make them interested in this. Mexican culture is no exempt from this. In recent years, a wave of attention has emerged towards Mexican traditions and their worldview, specifically the mysticism that imbibes the Mexican daily life, where women are a key and important part of it. Momexcopinki is a being born on astrological market days. It represents and has the energy of the gods Tezcatlipoca, god of the underworld, and Quetzalcoatl, creator of the world, that represents the maximum duality in the Mesoamerican world, representing the creation and the destruction of things. The animal transmutation that she had to acquire before leaving that they perform as a ritual in front of their tlecuyi, a fire made with stone and wood, that endowed them with the characteristics of a bird called guajolote, a turkey, large wings, a very pointed beak, and legs of this animal. Fire is an important element that prevails in them as we could see previously, that it is also observed when they are coming down from their hiding places in the mountains and hills in the form of a sphere of fire that flies through the sky. The night as a vehicle of their power, only at night could they acquire their powers and be free to show them. The history is mixed with elements of Christianism and European mysticism. The principal, the devil as master and cult figure whom the Momexcopinki serve. Sylvia Marcos tells us about a general classification of the different actions and types of curanderas, healers, witches that inhabit different mystical histories. Curanderas as receptacles or vehicles. They use the term glass to refer to women who receive the spirits, host the divinity in their body, transforming themselves into a guide. Their human borders are like permeable membranes. They allow a dynamic interaction with the deity. It is not they who speak. It is not they who heals. It is the secret through them. Curanderas as messengers. The woman messengers of the divine who cross the dangerous paths of conscience and perception, return with news of the divinity, with relief cures and revelations. Curanderas as a companion. She and the divinity are colleagues and allies. They have a common task to alleviate the pain and grief of the person who suffers. She asks the divinity for help and intimate tone, sharing the weight of responsibility. Curanderas as servant. Most fall in this term. They are the yerberas, herbalists, mensajeras, messengers, and parteras, companions in childbirth. In history and rituals around the lake woman, Berenice Granados tells us about the practice and narratives that take place around the lake located in Sirahuen, a town that is part of the municipality of Salvador Escalante in Michoacán, Mexico. Granados compiles stories that are born from this place in which the inhabitants assure that the lake itself is a female entity because its distribution refers to a female body. It is believed that the lake does not drown random people, but that the only ones it attracts are young men or adults, through the projection of a mermaid. Many believe that the reason for this disappearance and death is a way in which the lake asks and charges a tribute to continue providing them with food and commerce to support the town's economy. La Llorona is a woman in white who wanders the streets of the different states of Mexico in search of her children. Depending on the version, some say that herself murdered them, others say that they died in an accident. It is also said that in her appearances you can see a very beautiful woman or just a silhouette that floats as she advances, but what characterizes her the most is a crying of pain and sorrow that she utters. Oh, my children. According to Gloria Godínez Rivas, this legend has its origins some years before the arrival of Spanish conquerors, the indigenous people preserved omens that announced the history to come, the defeat of a people, who according to Fray de Sagún, quoted by Godínez Rivas, mentions, "We have to go away, and sometimes she will say, 'My children, where will I take you?'" Sagún identified this entity as a woman with long and flowing hair as Cihuacoatl, a Mexica deity half woman, half snake. For visual interpretation, we rely on the singularities mentioned above and the elements and symbols that we discover within the myths, trying to find similarities between the characteristics attributed to Mexican women in past societies and contemporary Mexican women. For this interpretation of Metzcopinki, she represents the antithesis of the stereotype of the ideal woman in pre-Hispanic and colonial times. She is an independent, intelligent, and cultural woman with extraordinary capacities that were found as rare because a woman was thought as incapable of having those characteristics. Therefore, an evil aspect was assigned to her because of the fear that ignorance caused. To visually sculpt the Metzcopinki, we use fire as representation of strength and transmutation ability, winds as freedom and symbol of the pre-Hispanic origins, and darkness as a symbol of rebellion. In the photographs, it was decided to show an urban open and tall setting, counteracting the rural location of a town between hills, showing a sunset to symbolize the beginning of the night, and the model was covered with a red fabric to symbolize fire and transmutation. It was decided to play with the addition and montage of different photos and the use of long exposure shots to generate long and not so defined strokes or of certain details in the photograph. In the first picture. In the second and third photographs, it was decided to use the composition to show the emergence of the witch like a flame in the night.
The music for Metzcopinki is inspired by tribal percussions and urban music, seeking for a link between rhythms and patterns as a physical expression of sexuality and strength. This kind of manifestations can be found in both contemporary and colonial societies, like reggaeton music and genres as chuchombe or son jarocho, which were banned by the Catholic Church for being offensive, explicit, and even blasphemous. The mix of beats and textures reflects the aggressive connotation of the fire element described in the mythology, playing ironically with a phrase from the Spanish film Aquelarre: "There is nothing more dangerous than a woman who dances."
For the representation of the curanderas, the composition and elements were chosen to enrich the main characteristics of this figure: the connection with nature, kindness, and community feeling. In this interpretation, unlike the common representation of the curanderas, a trait of young woman was chosen to embody the sisterhood and support among women and leaving aside the belief of being only a container or medium used by external divinity. But instead, it shows them as the divinity itself. Their essence is the reason for all the good things that emanate and share with others. The chosen elements were an open location in the nature, a natural color palette to represent the link that exists between woman and nature, three models to accentuate sisterhood, and a current wardrobe that ties to modern fashion.
Las Curanderas is represented as a group of three young women, so the music is a search to reflect joy, youth, playfulness, and energy through a dance theme, strongly attached to the music form of Metzcopinki. It is inspired by the music found in pre-Hispanic rituals as the temazcal, where the repetitive drum beat leads the group of people while they sing. The mix and the music composition situate the listener as if she were in the middle of the women while they dance, as being part of another ritual known as limpia, or cleaning, a process of purification of the soul.
The contemporary interpretation of the Sirawen mermaid takes at its starting point the characteristics of the body of water, the lake, provider, protector, and corrector, in addition to the clear connection with the water and the connection between the mermaid appearance and the attraction and sexuality of woman. It was decided to show her as a single mom relaxing in her bathtub after a long day at work, The elements used were the aqua, brown, and orange color palette, children's toys, appears, and photographs of a child.
The music for La Sirena is an environmental piece that puts the listener in front of the woman in the photograph, imagining being inside of the same bathroom in a house situated in the middle of a big, noisy urban city. It accompanies the character in an attempt to find calm and relaxation after a heavy workday with water sounds and soft synthesizers. The sound design elements such as the city sounds and the voice of the kid represents the raw objective reality of the scene, while the music from the scenes expresses the internal feelings of the character. Neither of the two elements overcome the other, they maintain the same levels, representing that the character is fully aware of both worlds.
La Llorona is one of the most representative figures of Mexican legends and myths, and her importance is so profound that she is attributed not only the basis of the identity of Mexican women, but of the entire Mexican society. In each and every one of the versions, the most important characteristic is wounded motherhood, the eternal search, and the deep pain. The essence that is embodied in the interpretation is a total allusion to the eternal waiting and search for the children that she has lost. It was decided to tell the photographs in a location that is a long corridor, and a large window that alludes to the tours that she does throughout the night. The color palette full of blues, greens, and purples alludes to an atmosphere of melancholy and sadness, as well as its connection with water in all versions of the legend.
The theme composed for La Llorona groups string instruments as guitars and cellos, influenced by Chabela Vargas and Mexican folk music as ranchera and son jarocho, with synthesizers, influenced by the contemporary composer Thom Yorke, which brings to the piece a mix of modern and nostalgic sonorities. The piece is structured as a loop that develops in a crescendo with addition of different layers ending in a decrescendo, seeking to represent a long cry with the beginning, a climax, and the end. The protagonist in this piece is a female voice, hardly panned from right to left through the entire theme. As the myth says, La Llorona can be heard crying while looking for her children in the street, so the voice is mixed as a special point of view, setting the listener as a witness in the middle of the path of the woman.
The chosen histories, Mometskopinki, the Curanderas, the Mermaid of Lake Sirawen, and La Llorona, show different aspects that were shaping and building the current Mexican woman. Some of them, although they were conceived as evil beings or with that duality of good and bad, deep down they only point out a special characteristic within woman that in past was taken for wrong, but that today can be embraced and claimed as their own, forging connection between our past and the present.
The preservation of cultural heritage has always been one of the most urgent problems due to the lack of registered media in Asian societies. Today, multimedia resources have changed the quality of communication in information society. In modern conditions, multimedia overcomes geographic boundaries, space, and contributes to the intensification of information exchange. Multimedia allows to use creative potential and find various and effective ways and methods to record this ancient information, create a new interpretation of myths, and communicate them in a new way with a new language understandable for new generations.
Thank you for your attention and see you later.